For thousands of years, people kept chickens. The chickens had an intact beak. They had the opportunity to hatch some children out of their eggs and be together with the coming generation. Plenty of fresh air, sunshine, could go for a stroll whenever they wanted, and everyone got along well. But times have changed. Today, most chickens live in prison. They're in small cages together with other chickens, crowded in, oftentimes the tip of their beak trimmed off, and they've got nothing to do all day long but eat and lay eggs and produce excrement. They don't get to keep the eggs, they don't get to fellowship with their babies. It's just a very boring life for the chickens. They don't like it. They're crowded in. The hygiene conditions are often poor, being crowded together like that. The FDA reported during an inspection of Roseacre Farms beginning in March, finding more than a dozen rodents. They also say employees touch dirty equipment on their bodies without washing their hands. Abysmal sanitation with plenty of rats in the house. More people are becoming sick from the salmonella outbreak that prompted a massive egg recall. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says at least 35 people across 9 states have been infected by the bacteria. Hospitals treated 11 victims. A dozen more cases of salmonella traced to eggs have been reported since the CDC first announced the outbreak nearly a month ago. The Food and Drug Administration has linked the outbreak to Roseacre Farms and the company's facility in North Carolina. Poor sanitation leads to massive outbreaks of disease, which hurt a lot of people who have been deceived into thinking that eggs are particularly good for them, when in reality, if the chickens don't have a good life, the people that eat the eggs don't either. CDC estimates salmonella causes about 1.2 million illnesses, 23,000 hospitalizations, and 450 deaths in the United States every year. You may really like bagels or extra fluffy pancakes, but 450 deaths a year? 1.2 million illnesses? Is that worth a little bit of taste? The only safety is to avoid eggs. Investigators worked with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and state authorities to trace the source of the illness, the FDA said. That led them to an egg farm in Hyde County, North Carolina, owned by Roseacre Farms of Seymour, Indiana. The affected farm has paused its egg distribution, and the company has voluntarily recalled more than 206 million eggs. The FDA urged consumers to check their purchases and avoid eating eggs that might be contaminated, which means to stop eating eggs, period. What eggs might be contaminated? 1.2 million people are getting sick off of eggs. There are an awful lot of eggs that could be contaminated. The only safe course is to avoid eggs completely. Outbreaks are a regular occurrence. Gravel Ridge Farms is recalling cage-free large eggs due to a potential contamination of salmonella. The recall was initiated because reported illnesses were confirmed at locations using Gravel Ridge farm eggs. Salmonella is an organism which can cause serious and sometimes fatal infections in young children, frail or elderly people, and others with weakened immune systems. Eggs aren't safe for anyone, but if you're old, frail, a child, a salmonella infection can have fatal consequences, that is, result in death. People will say, but I spend a little more money and get free-range eggs. These are free-range eggs we're talking about in connection with this outbreak. Healthy persons infected with salmonella often experience fever, diarrhea which may be bloody, nausea, vomiting, and abdominal pain. In rare circumstances, infection with salmonella can result in the organism getting into the bloodstream and producing more severe illnesses such as arterial infections, endocarditis, and arthritis. How many elderly people suffer from arthritis? Millions. This doesn't have to happen. If they would only take the very reasonable advice of the FDA and avoid the eggs, they wouldn't have to put up with all that pain and suffering. A Canadian study found that egg yolk consumption had 2/3 as strong an association with cardiovascular plaque as did cigarette smoking. Our findings suggest that regular consumption of egg yolk should be avoided by persons at risk of cardiovascular disease. So that's young children, the frail, the elderly, those at risk of cardiovascular disease. We're talking here about the 40% of Americans that are obese, they're at risk. And why not make it the 70% of Americans that are overweight? Why aren't they at risk? So many people should be taking the advice of the experts and avoiding eating eggs. But don't eggs have lots of vitamins, like vitamin B12 and the cobalamin form being 9% of the RDA, vitamin B2 riboflavin 15% of the RDA, vitamin A 6%, vitamin B5 7%, selenium 22%. Well, to get all of your B12 for the day, you'd have to eat 11 eggs per day, with 2,046 milligrams of cholesterol. Most healthy people can eat up to 7 eggs a week with no increase in their risk of heart disease. But that comes nowhere near satisfying your vitamin B12 requirements, which is why in the milk and eggs community, 66% of the people experience vitamin B12 deficiencies. The eggs are just not that great. The story may be different for people with diabetes. In this ever-growing population, some research shows eating 7 eggs a week significantly increases the risk of heart disease. Mayo Clinic. Those 100 million people with diabetes and prediabetes are just asking for heart disease when they eat their 1 egg a day, which comes nowhere close satisfying the need for vitamin B12 in any case. More than 100 million U.S. adults are now living with diabetes or prediabetes. The report finds that as of 2015, 30.3 million Americans, 9.4% of the U.S. population, have diabetes. Another 84.1 million have prediabetes, a condition that, if not treated, often leads to type 2 diabetes within 5 years. Well, this is another 1/3 of the population that cannot safely eat even 1 egg per day. You really don't even need eggs for vitamin A. 1 sweet potato will give you 561% of the RDA for vitamin A versus only 6% for an egg, and that with no salmonella poisoning. There are so many better alternatives. Spinach, tofu, almonds, and avocado all have more vitamin B2 than eggs, without innocent chickens being enslaved and murdered. Attractive, health-promoting plant foods can do so much more for you on the vitamin front than eggs can, without the risks of disease associated with eggs from factory farms and even the so-called free-range operations where the chickens are crowded together. Eggs have no fiber. Studies of large groups of people have shown an association between a typical Western diet and an increased risk of colon cancer. A typical Western diet is high in fat and low in fiber. When people move from areas where the typical diet is low in fat and high in fiber to areas where the typical Western diet is most common, the risk of colon cancer in these people increases significantly. If you were doing the egg industry a favor and eating your 11 eggs per day so you could get all of your vitamin B12 requirement from eggs, you would be getting no fiber, getting your calories taken care of from this no fiber source, and asking to get colon cancer. It's not even safe to touch eggs, let alone eat them. Shell eggs may be contaminated with salmonella through the laying process, or after the eggs are laid through contamination in the environment, such as contaminated poultry feed or bedding. Always wash your hands with soap and water after handling eggs, chickens, or anything in their environment. The CDC says that chances are very, very high that these eggs are contaminated. Got to wash your hands, totally clean up after even touching the eggs, even if you don't eat them. Very dangerous foods, which have so many more drawbacks than benefits. Contamination, slavery, torture and murder of innocent birds, poor source of vitamin B12, diabetes, heart disease, colon cancer. Eating eggs is just not worth the risk. There are plenty of available sources of vitamins which are much safer than the eggs. And as far as protein goes, there's nothing quite like beans, in particular lentils. So, you don't need eggs. Save your money and spend it on better foods.